Hi, and thank you so much for joining me for yet another episode of The Little Princesses by Marion Crawford. This book has captured my heart, and I think it's captured a lot of your hearts as well. I'll leave a link in the description box below if you're new to this weekly book series. We have it every week on a Friday night, and if you want to catch up on all the previous episodes, you can do that right now and come back to this one. Okay, so this chapter is titled A House in the Country. In London, the King and Queen led a busy and wearing life. The King was incessantly in touch with his ministers. The Queen encouraged the various war efforts and organisations and visited the bombed areas. Her gentle sympathy must have been a great comfort to many of the poor people in those days. Indeed, there's many images, isn't there, of the King and Queen visiting the bombed areas of London. And she always looked immaculate. She had special outfits made in dusty pinks and dusty blues because she wanted to give the people something and she wanted to boost morale. And I think indeed she did have that effect. There was one point in the war when different kings and queens were arriving at Buckingham Palace. One day, Queen Wilhelmina arrived with nothing but the clothes she stood up in. There was a great deal of hasty shopping to be done, and the Queen instructed her own dressmakers to call upon the Dutch Queen, who needed a hat. And she goes on to tell the story that many hats in many hat boxes were brought to Queen Wilhelmina, and she wasn't happy with any of them until the lady, basically the servant who brought up all the hat boxes to her, she said, "Your hat, I want a hat like yours," which was a very simple sort of middle class type hat. And that was what she wanted. But isn't it really poignant and meaningful when you think that here we have these displaced kings and queens being taken into Buckingham Palace and helped by the King and Queen of the UK. And they must have been looking at all these displaced king and queens thinking, is that going to be us in the months to come? The whole palace was on edge in those days. There was incessant activity of people arriving and people going, not knowing where they were going to or whether they would come back again or whether they would retain their thrones. Sometimes during the weekend, the Queen would come to my room when the children were in bed and talk to me very anxiously, as any mother might at such a time. Her Majesty had the same conviction as I, as so many other women I spoke to. We knew in our hearts we would come through, however hard and bitter the way. I remember one night she paused in the doorway as she left my room and smiled at me. "We little thought, did we, Crawfie, all we would have to go through," she said. Everyone on the estate had evacuee children living with them, mostly from the East End of London. Now, from time to time, after the princesses grew up, well after the war, Crawfie mentions that sometimes the princesses would run into these sort of Cockney evacuees from the East End of London, and they would recognise them. And the people always got a shock that the princesses would remember them. But they obviously had a huge impact on both of them. And there was one that Margaret actually met on the way to her for her trip when she was 18, I think, to Italy. And she ran into one called Jo. "Hello, Jo. Fancy seeing you here." It was a very pretty air hostess who had been in our guide company. She remembered the princess well enough, but probably never expected the princess would remember her. We had all the business of ration books and clothing coupons to deal with. Ella let out tucks and put in pleats. Great feats of men to make do. The whole family had this problem. The Queen and Queen Mary were given a certain number over and above the ordinary ration for their official clothes and garments for state occasions. The children had only the ordinary allowance, however. Later, the King very wisely put all the men's staff in the palace and Windsor Castle into navy blue battle dress with GR the 6th embroidered on the breast pocket. This was both comfortable and rather smart. On the 12th of May, the Queen, who was in London with the King, rang me up at 11 o'clock to say, "Crawfie, I think you'd better go at once to Windsor Castle, anyway, for the rest of the week." So Crawfie warned the footman and Ainsley, the butler, and she went off to pack, but she said she had a feeling in her bones that she wouldn't be coming back, that it wouldn't just be for the rest of the week. So she packed all her belongings and all her books, and then the children who arrived at 4 were then told the news. At 7 o'clock that night, we drove down the long walk to Windsor Castle. Alla had taken only clothes for the weekend for the princesses and herself, and she had to return to Royal Lodge for the rest. I was the only one who did not have to go back and repack. We remained at Windsor Castle for 5 years until the war ended. So it was very much more than just until the end of the week. A small paragraph appeared in the English and American papers. It said that the royal children had been evacuated to a house in the country. Windsor Castle was a fortress, not a home, and we were very aware of this. It is replete with every kind of historical trophy. There is a shirt that Charles I was executed in, and the bullet that came out of Nelson's heart, and bonny Prince Charlie's sword, as well as King Henry VIII's armour. Now, it was beginning to get dark when they arrived at Windsor Castle, and they were very tired and it was very gloomy. Pictures had been removed and all the beautiful glass chandeliers had been taken down. The state apartments were muffled in dust sheets, their glass-fronted cupboards turned to the walls. About the stone passages, the shadowy figures of servants and firemen loomed, attending to the blackout. And one man actually told Crawfie that by the time they'd blacked out all the windows in the castle, it was morning and they had to uncover them again. Isn't that amazing? The 2 little girls clung to me apprehensively. Alla, as always, when she was bothered or anxious, was cross. We none of us quite knew what was going to happen, and Alla and I, at any rate, knew very well the war was going to enter into a much more definite stage, and that the King and Queen in London were probably in considerable danger. The children had their usual quarters in the Lancaster Tower, where they'd always stayed when they came with their parents to Windsor. The court had always gone there for Easter and Lilibet's birthday. The Lancaster Tower is 3 stories high and dates from Henry VIII's time. Lilibet had her own bedroom and a bathroom, sharing the former with Bobo, an arrangement I was glad of at this juncture, for Bobo was a sensible Scottish lass who one felt would bring calm and unperturbed thoughts through innumerable bombardments. She hails from a place in Inverness-shire called the Black Isle. Now, I have to say, I read this rather strange comment last week, and it said, why do you always refer to her as Lilibet? She wasn't referred to as Lilibet. She was only referred to Lilibet by Prince Philip and her father, and why are you calling her Lilibet? Because it's in the book. It's in the book. That's what Marion Crawford calls her throughout the entire book. Lilibet. Okay? Gee, she was rude. Did make me cross. All right, we'll continue. Bathrooms had been let into the tremendously thick walls of the castle, bringing the place more up to date, but there is no central heating of any kind there. There are electric stoves in the bedrooms, which were considerably affected, as everywhere, by fuel cuts, and had a way of going out altogether at the coldest moments. There were log fires in the sitting rooms. To travel the icy passages from sitting room up to bed was a feat of considerable endurance. I often wore fur boots under my evening dress. I was all on my own, quite away from anyone else in the Victoria Tower. It was approached by the usual winding staircase. I had a large bedroom and sitting room, but my bathroom was out on the roof. This was a rather chilly arrangement, and when the bombs began to fall, not too comfortable. I always hoped that if one came my way, it would choose a convenient moment. The warning arrangements had been carefully thought out. There was a special bell which rang when we had to go down to the shelter. We all felt lost at first. The nights were so dark and we did not know what was happening. The children were cross too, because so many of the things they wanted were still at Royal Lodge. The master of the household was Sir Hill Child, and he told me at dinner that first night that it would be at 8 we dress, he said gravely, and it was in the octagon room. So Marion Crawford goes to try and find the Octagon Room. Don't forget, it's all in blackout. It's very dark. There's no one to ask. So eventually she found it. She had a red velvet dinner dress to sort of guard against the chilly air. And she found the gentlemen on my arrival all conventionally attired in dinner jackets with black ties. Household dinner was pretty grim. It sounds awful and really boring. So Crawfie decided that new blood seemed essential if we were all to remain friends. So I decided to get Monty, Miss Montague Smith, to come back and help me with all the lessons. Now, the girls were really fond of her. She was really fun and she brightened things up, and I think she brightened things up for the whole staff as well. I'd never actually heard of her before, and evidently the children loved singing with her. We were all ensconced in the castle with Ella in the nursery at the time the first bombs fell on Windsor. About 2 nights after we settled in, the alarm bell went. I'd bought a siren suit, which was very like Mr. Churchill's, and it was made of green velvet. I was rather pleased to put it on. It had been arranged that I would not collect the children, and Ella would, do that because she was with them in that tower, because she was quite a long way off. So she made her way down to the shelter. But when she got there, there was no sign of the children, no sign of Ella, and everyone was in a great state of fuss. And Sir Hillchild came up and said, "This is impossible, they simply must come." So poor old Crawfie ran all the way to the nursery where she could hear a great deal of commotion going on, and she shouted, "Ella!" Very often, Ella thought her voice was the Queen's, and she would say, "Yes, Your Majesty," and would be absolutely furious afterwards at her error. But Crawfie said, "It's not Your Majesty, Ella, it's Crawfie. Lord Wigram and Sir Hillchild and everybody else is waiting in the shelter. You must come down. This is not a dress rehearsal. What are you doing?" Ella was always very careful. Her cap had to be put on and her white uniform. Lilibet called, "We're dressing, Crawfie, we must dress." I said, "Nonsense, you are not to dress. Put a coat over your night clothes at once." They finally came to the shelter, and by this time Sir Hillchild was a nervous wreck. He stood rather in awe of Ella, but he said, "You must understand, the princesses must come down at once. They must come down whatever they're wearing." The shelter was in one of the dungeons, not a particularly inviting place anyway. The atmosphere was gloomy and there were beetles. The walls had all been reinforced and beds put up, but the first night, for some reason, nothing was ready. The little girls were very good. They took it all most calmly. Margaret fell asleep on my knee. Lilibet lay down and read a book. Someone came along presently and whispered to me that there was a red warning. I sat nursing Margaret, straining my ears and praying for the night to pass. It was 2 a.m. before the all-clear sounded towards the end of our vigil. Sir Hillchild made tea. He was a distinguished-looking person, and he said in a very dignified manner that they could all go back to bed. After that, the children got proper siren suits. When the bombing got really bad, we all slept downstairs in the dungeon. You could see the princesses going off at 7 with their little cases as if they were going to catch a train at Paddington Station. She also said that sometimes they had bomb warnings during the day, and often they were out in the grounds when the siren would go off. So they would enter all these strange little caves that King George III had built, and they were amazing. There was a long tunnel that led to one really vast cave, and the wall was studded with pebbles. They did smell very damp and horrid, but Margaret loved to run on ahead and jump out at us and shout, "Boo!" A company of Grenadier Guards came 3 days after we arrived, and we were introduced to Sir Francis Manners and 4 officers who lived in the castle and came to meals. I thought this was wonderful. Lilibet was now 14, growing up, and it gave us an opportunity to teach her how to be a hostess. The officers were charming. They came to household breakfast. They had very gay lunch parties with the children. Lilibet and Margaret and Sir Dudley Collins, Sir Gerald Calley and 3 officers. The officers loved to meet the 2 girls and talk to them. Lunch was quite a long meal, which started at perhaps 1:45 and went on to 3. Margaret began to develop a real personality then with the male element about. She kept everyone in fits of laughter, and she had a gay little way with her that won everybody's heart in the gloomy old castle. And I hate to sort of repeat myself, but that's what I mean. It was pity she started drinking, because I think really her character was quite lovely, but I think some people's character gets distorted by alcohol, and she was very much reliant on alcohol. Presently, the officers asked us to tea in the guard room. It was a special tea party got up for the little girls. The batman had obviously borrowed one of the best tablecloths from the housekeeper, and there was bowls of cherries and chocolate cakes and a wonderful assortment of other little cakes, and everyone was very gay, and Lilibet was pleased because she was asked to be hostess and pour the tea. After tea, there was guessing games and charades, and I think the officers were as sorry as we were when the party was finally over. We saw little of Queen Mary during the war. She joined the Duke and Duchess of Beaufort in their country house in Gloucestershire. This she had been most loth to do. If she could have had her own way, she would have sat out the war firmly in London. There was nobody in the whole of England who went in for austerity to such a degree as Queen Mary. She kept everybody busy from morning to night with knitting parties or rolling bandages, and she in person would go out in the woods and assist with the felling of the trees. During the war years, when possible, the King and Queen paid regular weekend visits to Windsor Castle, arriving on Fridays in time for tea at 5 o'clock. Very often the princesses and I would take Jock on the rein and Hans the Norwegian pony and 3 dogs, Crackers, Susan and Ching, along an avenue leading to one of the main gates to meet Mummy and Papa. Now, there was little Jane, the corgi, who was a particular favourite of Princess Elizabeth, and unfortunately, Jane was run over by one of the gardens by accident, and the poor man was shaken and very upset because he knew how devoted Princess Elizabeth was to Jane. And Princess Elizabeth was very sad, but assured him again and again it was not his fault and she should have taken greater care of the dog. When we returned back to the castle, Princess Elizabeth sat down at once and wrote a most charming note to the gardener. She really was one of the most kind-hearted little girls. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that lovely? Princess Elizabeth gave her first broadcast to the children of England in those distressing days of 1940 when families were being torn apart and every village and country town were full of the poor, homesick little scraps longing for their mummies. She was so good about the endless rehearsals. We had to get the breathing and phrasing right. It was a long, tedious business for a little girl. She read her speech several times to Mummy and Papa, though royal speeches in general are more or less mapped out beforehand from a policy point of view. A great deal is put in by the family themselves, and the Queen especially has a rather sweet human touch, which is so helpful in making these occasions sound intimate rather than purely official. Lilibet was always too serious-minded to play practical jokes, but Crawfie goes on to say that her and Margaret just loved a practical joke. And there was actually a bell that they longed to ring, her and Margaret, just to be really naughty. And it was the alarm bell on the terrace. It was supposed to be rung only by the sergeant. When the bell rang, it actually brought out the whole guard all over the castle. Margaret and I put Lilibet into a frenzy of nerves by opening the door to the little box, and they would pretend to touch the bell, but they wouldn't press it. Whereupon she would rush into the castle with the dogs and say, "You can't do it. You just can't do it." One day, the major in command, who had, I think, seen us doing this and knew what we wanted to do, said to us, "You may, if you like, ring in any morning you like this week, just offhand. You can do it, because this is the week for practicing the bringing out of the guard to see how quickly they can assemble." I said to Margaret, "This is your chance. Go down before breakfast and ring the bell." But she got into a state of giggles and nerves. "Oh, I couldn't possibly." I said, "You've been longing to do it for months, you know." She said, "No, Crawfie, you do it." So Crawfie did. One day before breakfast, before 9, she went down early, about 8:30, and two little faces, the princesses, appeared at the bedroom window where they'd been waiting for ages to see Crawfie actually walk down these steps. Then she looked up at them and she said, "I'm going to do it." And their faces went pink. "Oh, do hurry. The sentry's coming round the corner. Oh, hurry up, Crawfie. Oh, hurry up." And then Crawfie realised that everybody in the whole castle was going to come running as she pressed that bell. And she got attack of the nerves and she looked up and said, "I can't do it." And they said, "Oh, you are a coward. Go on." So I opened the door and pressed the bell. And immediately all the bells began ringing all over the castle, down the slopes, down the drive. Every bell in England seemed to be ringing. The princesses tried not to go into shrieks of laughter. They said my face was a complete picture of horror at what I'd done, and I speedily went through to breakfast rather red in the face, and she met some of the officers who were running along the corridor. Now, there was one wonderful night, scary night in Windsor, when there was a genuine scare, a parachutist, German parachutists arriving, and every precaution was taken, and the guardsmen were ready with their Tommy guns. Now, there was two cream-coloured ponies, Norwegian ponies, who had had foals, and there was a big thunderstorm, and the foals got a fright and jumped the fences of the paddocks and actually ended up in the grounds of Windsor Castle. And because they were white in the moonlight, these soldiers with Tommy guns thought that they were parachutists. But luckily, despite all the commotion, despite all the yelling, despite all the hoo-ha, they realised that they were little cream-coloured foals and they didn't shoot. And they were found later on down by the river the next day. At Windsor during the war, we were given our helmets and gas masks, and we were also given in a tree little box marked iron rations, which we kept close to our helmets in a holdall. We also had plugs for our ears to be used when the guns went off. Princess Elizabeth used to set us a great example by wearing her gas mask every day as required and by carefully cleaning the eyepiece every evening with the ointment provided. The gas chamber was brought to Windsor to test the mask, and Crawfie went through it. And she got through it okay because she didn't want the children to have to do it. But afterwards, she went and stood in front of the fire, and all the gas regenerated off her tweeds, the fumes, and nearly killed her. So, that's a bit scary. The long slow months went by, and we remained incarcerated and cut off in Windsor Castle. They were monotonous days, but certain incidents stood out. All through one lovely early summer day, we could hear the sound of far-off shattering explosions and gunfire. Aircraft kept coming overhead. The little girls were bothered and anxious about their father and mother and kept pausing in their play to ask anxiously, "Crawfie, whatever is it?" I was at least able to assure them that whatever was taking place, it was not in London. I knew it was too far off for that, and I was right. It was Dunkirk, where the army was being taken off the beaches by a flotilla of brave little boats. We kept a large map with flags on it which had moved from place to place, and I kept the little girls up to date as far as possible with what was happening. It was with profound relief I remember that they both rushed to speak to their parents on the telephone that evening and learnt that they were quite all right. Lilibet developed rapidly, and those quiet months at Windsor helped a lot. For the first time, she was on her own, away from her parents, and at various meal times and when we gave parties, it was she who had to do the honours, play hostess, and see to the seating of the guests. She had been a rather shy little girl, and she'd become a very charming young person, able to cope with any situation without awkwardness. We had lunch all together with the household and schoolroom tea, but they still kept up the old habit of a simple nursery dinner. And that's the end of Chapter 7. Chapter 8, next Friday night, 9:30 Australian Eastern Standard Time, is gas masks and pantomimes. I hope you will join me for that, for another exciting chapter. I can't wait, actually. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.